So Josh, what does XTB want the government to do?
So we're calling on the government to change the law to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to open an ISA. It doesn't matter whether it's a cash ISA or a stocks and shares ISA. Essentially, they can't do it until they're 18, and we think the law should change, and that's what we're campaigning for.
But why do XTB think 16 and 17-year-olds should be investing?
Okay, importantly, we think 16 and 17-year-olds should have the option of having an ISA. So it's not we're going to force anyone. We want to change the law so they have the option of doing it. And it comes down to two core issues. The first one, which I think is crucially important, is it's going to teach young people lifelong habits around money, around investment, and the value of putting their money to work so that in real terms they're not losing. And this is a really important thing that I feel people need to learn as early as possible. Even the government are backing this. They're trying to create a culture of investing as early as possible. This could be a key weapon in their arsenal in doing just that. The second thing is around fairness. So 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds, they can work. They're going to be paying tax. They're paying national insurance, right? But they can't invest their own money until they're 18. That's not fair. I think that's an outdated rule, and I think that we should change the law to make that different now.
I agree, but people might argue that the junior ISA already exists, which allows a parent or a guardian to save or invest up to £9,000 per year on their child's behalf, which they then get access to their 16, and then they can do whatever they want with that money when they're 18. But what's wrong with that system?
There's a lot wrong with it, to be honest with you. So the first thing I would say is, with the junior ISA, so the rules are, right, that you can open a junior ISA for your kids, and then when they're turned 16 and 17, they can take control of the investments, but they can't actually withdraw anything until they're 18. Mm-hmm. So again, there's no control aspect for a 16 or 17-year-old with a junior ISA. So they can't actually control. Why can't they withdraw their own money until they're 18, but they can invest it until that point? Again, that seems to me is completely wrong. The other thing is actually when you do the research, a lot of the brokers that offer junior ISAs, they don't actually allow 16 and 17-year-olds to invest. It's still on the guardian or the parent to actually make the investment choices, even though the law says that they can. So there's a big misleading aspect with that. The other aspect that I would say, is, again, comes down to fairness, right? So why should a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old who's paying tax, who might, because we know the government's legislating to try and let 16-year-olds vote. Mm-hmm. So they can vote for the government, for the next government, but they can't actually get access to a 20,000 tax-free investment level that an 18-year-old can. Again, fairness, for me, this is completely wrong, and I think the law needs to be changed.
Getting 16 and 17-year-olds investing and saving as early as possible is something that really resonates with my mission. So giving people the access to the knowledge, access to the actual tools to actually implement that knowledge is something that's going to be so powerful, because the earlier you're ingraining this knowledge and habits, the more they're going to benefit from those later down the line. So that's something that I find really powerful. And on your point from the junior ISA as well. So yeah, as you mentioned, so the junior ISA allows a parent or guardian to invest or save up to £9,000 per year on their child's behalf, right? And that child then gets access to the account at 16, but then can control the money at 18. So what's wrong with that system at the moment then?
Do you know the funny thing, because you said 16-year-olds get control, right, of their ISAs, but then they can't actually take the money out and have full control over it until they're 18. Do you know what's funny is that actually if you do research and you look at a number of the brokers that currently offer junior ISAs, they don't actually allow the 16-year-olds to make their own investment decisions. It's still on the guardian or the parent. Mm-hmm. So they're not actually enacting what legally they can do. So I think there's a big discrepancy there, and you have to ask the question, why is that happening? But when it comes down to it, ultimately, a 16-year-old, the government is legislating to allow a 16-year-old to vote. They can make their own medical choices. They can be in full-time employment and pay national insurance. They can pay income tax, right? But they can't get access to 20,000 worth of tax-free investing that an 18-year-old can. That feels completely unfair to me. I think it's ripe for change, and the sooner the better.
And I think on that point of £20,000 ISA allowance for adults, this isn't about how much these children can invest at this age. It's about instilling these habits earlier on and almost opening these doors to a whole different world of financial education that hopefully is going to ingrain these good habits later on in life when they do turn 18, when they do get into their early working life, where they do have enough money to save and invest. These are going to be habits that they learn way earlier in life, potentially 5 years earlier, that they now know how to implement because they had access to it earlier.
Completely agree. And I think a lot of probably the fear or the go-to kind of default defensive line against this would be, but a 16-year-old, if they invest, they could lose money.
So what would you say to people that say 16 is too young to start investing?
Whether a 16-year-old would make an investment mistake, right? That is perfectly valid argument. But you know what? There are 19-year-olds, there are 20-year-olds, there are 45-year-olds making exactly the same mistakes now. The best thing to do, I believe, is to get these habits ingrained in you as early as possible, because the earlier you make mistakes, the quicker you're going to learn from them, and the quicker you're going to develop these lifelong habits about the value of money, the value of investing, and how to really control your money over the longer period of time.
So on your point about financial education and making mistakes, so as we know, social media has played a huge role in improving the financial education or accessibility to financial education, especially for younger generations. But also with that, there's not always the best education on social media. And I think what this is going to enable us to do, especially in the younger generation, is shift that narrative away from these less financially responsible habits like gambling, like cryptocurrency, like day trading, which do dominate a lot of the narrative when it comes to what these younger generations are seeing on social media as a way to invest, as a way to build wealth. This campaign allows us to take control of that narrative back and almost encourage a more financially stable, more long-term, more safer way of saving and investing for the long term that encourages delayed gratification, that encourages discipline and, good money habits.
You're absolutely right, Cameron. And it makes me really proud and really happy the fact that you want to join this campaign too, because you're obviously a huge content creator, and I assume your audience is filled with people that you've helped to improve their financial literacy and they go to you to learn about this sort of stuff. So, maybe explain to me a little bit more about what are the key changes you feel that we need to make as part of this campaign that will actually improve 16 and 17-year-olds and their grasp of the value of money, for example.
So obviously there's absolutely no point in making these ISA products available to younger generations unless you teach them how to use them responsibly and how to use them effectively. So I think this campaign needs to be paired with education. It's essential. Without that, this is going to completely burn entirely. So I think that's the most important point. So I through my content, through what I create, I fulfill the education side of things. I'm unable to do things for them. I'm unable to provide financial advice. And if they can't access these products, they can't actually apply the knowledge that I am in helping them gain, basically. So that's often a question I get a lot of is, they're learning about the stocks and shares ISA, about the cash ISA, all of these savings products that are available to 18-year-olds and above. And, TikTok, of course, there's going to be younger generations on there. The 16 and 17-year-olds are on there, but they can't actually act on any of this information. And what's good in learning something if you can't actually practice it for another 2 years? 2 years is a very long time to wait for, especially I remember when I was 16 and I had 2 years at college. Felt like the longest time of my life. So I couldn't imagine having to wait that long to actually implement something I was learning. And
take complete control yourself as well, because that's the key risk and the key problem I always have with junior ISAs is the fact that you don't actually get full autonomy on it. No. It's under your guardian or your parent, for example. So XTB, we ran some freedom of information stats with HMRC to try and get a good assessment, right, of the usage of junior ISAs and what age groups actually utilize this. So I think it was in 2023, so the tax year 2023, 2024. And what we discovered is that there's a huge hole of 16 and 17-year-olds actually opening junior ISAs. So I think it's around, so in that tax year, there was around 400,000 who were aged between 11 and 15. Mm-hmm. There was about 100,000 between 17 and 18. And then for the full ISAs, when 18 to 24, there was over 1 million. Mm-hmm. So it's like a no man's land. And it makes sense to me because you've got all these 16 and 17-year-olds that probably want to invest, but they're like, well, I shouldn't do it now. I'll just wait until I get the full 20 grand ISA when I'm 18. So it shows you that it's a real ripe marketplace to really attack that, and shows you that if you supply them with the ability to do that, the demand will for sure meet it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's really interesting as well, because I guess as well, even they can't create these accounts without input from their parents or guardians. And if they haven't already got a junior ISA before they're 16, I imagine a junior ISA being something you create for your child when they're very young, when you're saving for their long-term future. If you haven't created an account for them at 16 or 17, you're probably not going to do it. And that's why there is such this unserved demographic, which, I completely agree.
So actually, because you're talking about parents and guardians, what do you think the response for parents would be to this sort of campaign?
So in terms of like their openness to it, so their agreement to it. So personally, it depends what age these parents are, but if they're the demographic of parents that I think they might be, I don't think they'd be too open to it. And I think the reason for that is just purely because of the lack of access to financial education they received at this age. Perhaps they put themselves in their children's shoes, and if they think it wouldn't have been right for them, perhaps they don't think it's right for their children either.
Do you know what? I had the exact same opinion, right? So we actually commissioned a polling agency called Find Out Now. They do a lot of political polls, one of the biggest in the UK. So we commissioned them to run a poll for both Gen Z and parents. So, and the stats really surprised me. So actually, if you when they asked parents about the ability to give their child 16 and 17 their own ISAs where they can invest their own money, only 30% said they were against the idea.
Okay.
So it shows you the vast majority are really open to it. 55% were like 100% give it to them. I really want them to learn these life-changing habits. And then around 15% were like in the don't know box.
Okay.
So it shows you the majority of parents actually back this sort of idea, which I was shocked about. I thought we'd have to do like a big roadshow of education to convince parents about the value of it. And then when you actually look at Gen Z, so we did the exact same poll, but we were targeting Gen Z. And the reason why that's quite important, because obviously these are people that have started investing already, but they weren't allowed to when they were 16 and 17 with their own money, right? So they clearly have an appetite because they want to invest. And 70% of Gen Z wanted the ability to do their own money at 16 and 17. So for me, when we're campaigning against the government to change the law for this, I think there's support on both sides, both with Gen Z and with the kids, and then also with the parents' side. So, and this is where we need your help, because you're the one with the contacts with the government, right?
I mean, I can quite a bold claim, but yeah, no, I've been in some rooms where there's been a lot of conversation about how we're going to shift this investing culture in the UK. How are we going to get more people not just saving, but also investing? You know, we've seen in the news about, you know, all this speculation about ways that the government are going to encourage us to invest more of our money. But I think they're going the wrong way about it by trying to change how adults invest. I think they need to start with the new generation of investors, and that is the Gen Z. I think that's the way that we need to position this for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, Rachel Reeves talks about creating a culture of investing. I 100% back this. I think it's the absolute right thing to do. But it needs to be not just education. We need to actually put proper action behind that and give people the ability to really learn these habits in practice and in real life, you know? So it's great that obviously we're both on the same page here. And I really think like we've got a huge window of opportunity now, because Rachel Reeves is talking about creating a culture of investing in the UK. So I think some of the ideas that we're proposing here to change the laws can have a real tangible effect and can really make a change. So let's say they change the law tomorrow. What do you think are like the most important things that we'd have to change straight away in terms of from an education perspective for 16 and 17 year olds? So trying to give them a solid grasp of like what to do with their money and how to control it in the right way.
Well, I'll tell you what's quite a barrier for people when it comes to starting investing, and that's the risk warnings that come alongside it. So what capital at risk, your money, you know, past performance doesn't indicate future performance. You need to be expected to pull out less than you put in. These are all terminologies that scare people that don't understand investing from the foundations, right? So it's going to be something that puts them off, and it's something that the government have discussed changing. Whether or not anything's actually come into an effect yet, I don't think so. But I think that the risk warnings is something that needs to be looked at for sure. It needs to be less about talking about the risk of investing and how you can lose money, but also be talking about the risk of not investing your money, about what happens if you just save money for 30 years. What if you just keep all your money in cash under the bed? What's going to happen to it? These are things that I like to cover quite a lot in my content as well, especially with the economic state of how things are going at the moment, talking about inflation, talking about, you know, the risk of not investing. So I think that's something that needs to be visited for sure, because that's going to, you know, almost make it less of a intimidating venture to start that investing journey.
Completely, 100%. I love that idea, to be honest, especially around risk warnings, because banks should have a risk warning saying like, if you put your money in your bank and they're not paying you interest, and in real terms you're losing money. Yeah, but there's no risk warning for that.
No, right? there needs to be a risk warning that you are 100% guaranteed to lose your money with inflation if it's not invested, if you're not receiving an interest rate that's on par with inflation at least.
Completely agree. And then when you think of like of 16, 17 year olds, even younger than that, if you think the first big financial milestone for a lot of young people is actually to buy their own home, like that has becoming more and more challenging every day because of the supply of houses and obviously inflation and all these sort of things. So actually learning these core habits of either investing your money or actually putting it and working it even passively with cash ISAs, earning interest, for example, these sort of habits will help build them to that big first financial milestone for a lot of people. These are the sort of things I think we need to educate.
Yeah, 100%. Because I think what we're seeing is, especially I can speak from my own perspective, my, financial education came from my parents, and what worked for them doesn't necessarily work for this generation of 16 and 17-year-olds. As you said, like with inflation, with house prices, with all of these things that are going on that are beyond this room, things aren't as easy as they may have been like 30 years ago, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. So I think it's important that these children are exposed to this knowledge and given access to this knowledge as early as they can, so they can actually start taking steps to benefit their financial futures.
Obviously, we're trying to make a change in the law to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to have full control of the money and open ISAs, right? What percentage of the people who are, say, Gen Z right now, so they've been investing for 5 or 6 years already, what percentage of them do you think would support the campaign?
I think it's going to be quite high. So I think, especially as we've spoken about, with financial education becoming more normalized for Gen Z especially, and it's, speaking as a Gen Z myself, so I'm 26 years old. I personally wish I'd started investing early, even if it was just a small amount. Not talking about big amount of numbers here. I wasn't earning much when I was 16 personally. I think I was earning probably £4 an hour at Specsavers. I think I was earning. So, but the point is, I wish I had started earning earlier, and I wish that for the future generations as well. So I think the numbers are going to be quite high.
You're right. So, and I think that if anything, that just validates what we're trying to do, because I think that is the best example, right, of people who are already investing, and they're telling us that actually I wanted to be able to invest earlier. I shouldn't have had to wait till I'm 18. So it's 70%. Ooh. 70%. So we commissioned through a polling agency called Find Out Now, which is one of the biggest polling agencies in the UK. And they asked lots of Gen Z who are already investing over the last 6 or 7 years, and said, if you had the ability to invest your own money and control it fully at 16, would you have liked that opportunity? And 70% said yes. Now I'm going to flip it, because this is probably the scariest bit, right? So parents of 16 and 17-year-olds, do you think that they would support the campaign as well? What do you think the polling data says for them?
It's going to be lower. It's definitely not going to be as high as 70%, but that purely comes because they didn't have the same kind of access to financial education that the Gen Z of today have. So I think it's going to be quite lower.
You're right, but so my initial assumption was probably maybe 15%. Like 15% of parents, because I think parents probably have this thing was like, well, they're probably going to be investing my money, maybe not their money, because that's the assumption, right? Because not everyone who's 16 and 17, a lot of them could still be in full-time education. They may not be earning their own funds. Actually, so if we flip it a little around and say, like, of the percentage of the parents that we asked, would they allow their 16 or 17-year-olds to invest their own money in a fully fledged ISA, whether it's cash ISA or stocks and shares ISA? Only 30% said no. I was shocked at that. 55% said, hands down, I want them to have it today. So a majority of people want it today. And even then, a very tiny minority are against the idea as a whole. I was really shocked at that data.
Yeah,
and I think, again, so we've got Gen Z who are keen to have access at 16 by the polling data. And the same polling data tells me that parents actually support this idea too.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, I need to email this to Rachel Reed.
Yeah, so you definitely do.
But then talking the last thing, and you've mentioned it because one of the things that you talk about in your videos a lot is about compounding interest.
Yeah.
And I think that you make a really valid point. I think probably we could also explain a little bit more about how that would actually be an aspect that 16 and 17-year-olds are losing by not having the full control of their money with a fully fledged ISA as well, right?
The sooner you start investing, no matter how small that amount is, the more it's going to benefit from compound interest, where your interest is earning interest, right? So by giving access to ISA products to 16 to 17-year-olds, regardless of how much they're able to invest, if they started, 2 years earlier, every year counts with compounding. That could have huge benefits later down the line. And I think, with investing, time is your greatest asset. So giving these investors an extra 2 years on their investing journey can just make an absolute huge difference later down the line. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, those 2 years will be making a huge difference. So this whole campaign sounds amazing. I'm really for it. I'm fully backing it. But I think what's really important to make clear is that we're not forcing anybody, no 16 or 17-year-old, to start investing. This is just about giving people the choice, the option to do it if they want to, if they want to take financial responsibility, if they're earning money, if they're paying taxes, if they're, potentially voting one day. They should have access to the same things that adults have.
Yeah, absolutely. The recent data actually is around, I think, 30% of the adult population investing in stocks at the moment. So it gives you an idea, right? So
Yeah.
I completely agree. This is not like, we're not forcing people to invest. We're not forcing people to open cash ISAs. Basically, we're giving them the option. That's what this is all about, is that making it much more fairer for 16 and 17-year-olds to have the same rights and the same access levels that you would if you're 18, because ultimately we need to level the playing field, and a 16-year-old could be in full-time employment versus an 18-year-old. 20 years ago, probably this argument would have fallen on deaf ears. Today, I think it's much more valid.
Completely agree.